don't want companies to do that anymore. What I would really like companies to do is to use metrics for good. And I will step into it. And this is very hard for me. Sitting still and talking with you guys is extremely hard because I don't like slides. I like whiteboards. I don't like slide decks. Being online is a format that is forcing me to actually engage with you instead of standing up in front of you, and instead of like actually speaking and have an audience response. So when I started this, I used to end on a very sad note. I used to end on a very sad anecdote. And over time, I found that it's better to start with that anecdote. So I had a team back in the day, and that team had a problem. The company said that the APIs were all throwing errors, that we had, bits. We had, ones and zeros that were not working right. And we had bit fields. And for those of you not familiar, a bit field is a 1 or a 0, but we had nullable bits. So we had ones and zeros and nulls. And the nulls were causing a real issue. And the company decided that they were going to put a measure on the teams that could most quickly take care of the nullable bits, because we had to have ones and zeros. A bit field by nature is 1 and 0. A nullable bit field is a problem for the APIs. So we rushed through it, our entire company. We put incentives behind having the bit fields, taken care of, that there would be no more nullable bits. So on my particular team, there was an argument. Is a null, is it false, or is it positive? Is it something else? How do we solve it? And our particular team, we said a null means it's false, right? So we did that. We put that in, the database was updated. There were no more nullable bits. The problem is the field that one of the fields that we changed was, it literally said IED. So we had people in the field that were looking at a report, and it said there is no IED in this area. So I was working for the Air Force at the time, and we literally said there's no IED. We changed a field to fix a metric for a company. So we had a Humvee go out in the morning, and several Marines that were relying on this report, they went out and they saw the report said, no, there's no IEDs, because we changed it from null to false. We changed a report to say something based on metrics that were not important. And this Humvee hit an IED in the field, and one person lost their life and another person lost their legs, and are not the same, right? So this is why it's so important to me. Why when I'm working for Freddie Mac right now, why it's important to me is because I want to make sure people understand the metrics we use every single day are important. We may not know the downstream effects of those, but we have to make sure that our data is correct, that we have to make sure that we're using it for the right reason. And even if it's not that severe, even if it's not the Air Force, even if it's not somebody losing a life, we have to make sure that the data we're collecting and the way we're using it is used in the right way. We're using it for good. And I pause on that because it's so exceptionally important. Many of you work for government, many of you work for industry. You have to know that the reason and the format that you collect data in is super important. So I used to end on that. I used to end my session on that, but I was told it was very depressing. So instead I start with that. So, hey, how you guys doing? Y'all good? Yeah.
We're good. At least
All
I
right.
am. That
Cool.
kind of drives home why it's so important to focus on, getting requirements right and making sure you're talking to the right people.
Yeah. So why do we capture metrics? Steve, give me an answer. Why do we capture it?
Well, two reasons. One, we believe we're capturing them so we're to measure value, but often we capture them to measure things that don't provide value.
So Steve, you might say it's because the quantitative and qualitative way to determine business performance through the lens of various stratas of the organization, as well as how it relates to external pressures, internal risks, and controls. I think, Steve, you would say that.
That's what I was going to say. But
I know. You were right there. It was the tip of your tongue. Here's what I say. Because we want to be able to do good stuff in a good way and know if our stuff is any good. That's the entire point of capturing metrics. This is the slide that most people take their phones out and take pictures of, because this is the entire point of capturing metrics. If it goes beyond this, I say you're doing a wrong job. If you are doing anything more than figuring out how you do good stuff in a good way and know if your stuff is any good, you're probably going too far. This is also very hard because I got like 4 people on picture here and we got like 60 in chat. So I'm working through it. Steve, I'm having a moment. I need to see facial feedback. All right.
I like
the definition.
I think this is really good. So,
So OKRs, KPIs, and GQM. So most people probably have heard of OKRs, right? Like that's the Google, it's objectives and key results, right? We've heard of that. KPIs, that's the standard stuff. Key performance indicators, that's the stuff we do. How many of you have heard of GQM? Yeah, most have not. So what's funny is I did like 2 years touring on like teaching GQM. Nobody knows what it is, so that I did an absolutely terrible job. But GQM is goal, question, and metric. Basically, it's the same thing as OKRs, but it goes a little bit deeper. So OKRs, here we go. I'm not going to read it for you. You guys can read it, but it's really, we set an objective and then we have key results. If we're hitting the key results, then we know we're meeting our objective. It's over time. So you set an objective at some period and then you have key results behind it. The key results tell us that we're hitting that objective over time. I'll pause while you guys read. All right, KPIs, key performance indicators. This is more customary. This is what we use in industry. It is literally just a measure that we say we're going to do something is going to go up. We want to have more customers, then we see the KPI going up. We got more customers, we're good. It's literally, it's a raw score, KPIs. And we generally, most organizations have multiple KPIs. Then we got GQM, which is the one that nobody knows of, even though I taught about it for a couple of years. That's just hurts my brain to think about that. Nobody knows about it. And I spent a couple of years on this.
Well, now at least we all will know. Since
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
all right, because you said that, I'm going to quiz you a year from now and see if you still remember.
Are you telling that to John or to me?
You.
Yes.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remove it for the next 15 minutes.
Almost sounds like GQ men or something, but I think it's something different.
All right, maybe you will remember it now.
I'm worried for the future of the nation. All right, so GQM, it is 3 levels: conceptual, operational, quantitative. Honestly, when we get into it, how do they work together? So you have the O. I think this tells the tale. This is it. I mean, this tells the story, right? You got an objective. You got key results behind it. Those key results might have KPIs behind them. Or you could have a KPI leading an objective, which leads to a key result, which leads to KPIs. Or you could have KPIs leading to OKRs, leading to KPIs, leading to OKRs, or you could have GQM, which is your goal, question, metric, and that could actually guide the whole thing. And I think that was very simple and clear. Do you guys agree that that past slide was, it's very, very clear what we're doing here?
Sure.
I like this though.
It seems to be the way that business actually operates, that whoever's in the driver's seat defines their own part of the picture, and then they explain it to a group and they define another part of the picture thinking it's the same thing. And that's why you end up with multiple reports from the same data telling us different things.
Exactly.
Like a game of
Good point.
telephone.
It is. So it's not only a game of telephone, it is a game of, so Dave Brickman leads Freddie Mac, and I'm speaking on behalf of John Tanner, not Freddie Mac, I have to say that again, but Dave Brickman leads that, right? And he goes, how do I know which team is better than the other team? And he really wants to know, and he needs to know. And then I talk about OKRs, and then I talk about KPIs, and I talk about GQM, I talk about all these things, and it's not as hard as we make it. So when I really get into it, it's good intentions, right? So Dave Brickman has really good intentions. He wants to understand which teams are performing. He wants to understand which teams are doing well. Our CIO wants to know which teams are performing. How can we support them? But then we get into things like, all right, so this is a shout out to the entire group. When you think of legacy bad measures, the worst possible team level measure, what can you
Lines of code.
do?
Velocity?
Velocity.
Productivity.
I'm
That's
talking
it.
legacy, guys. Not right now, because velocity is definitely right now.
Speed.
Number of deliveries, number of deployments, excuse me.
Lines of code, dude. Do you remember? We used to get judged on lines of code.
Created a lot of bloat.
It was so bad. So I was talking with a previous manager. He was a VP in a company when I was just like a team lead. And he was telling me, I don't care how many lines of code you write, as long as you write 700 a week. It's like, I don't understand it. He probably still doesn't understand it, but it was terrible. So you guys all said it, probably nailed it in one. What is the current punitive measure we use?
Velocity.
Yeah, velocity. Velocity is the most terrible thing that we use right now. So velocity is good. Velocity variance is okay. To know if our team is performing, stabilizing, if they're working well, that's great. We want to know if velocity is stabilized. I don't care what your velocity is. I care that you're stable. I care that you're a stable team that is functioning and performing. Check-in frequency, that's another one that's, I can check in, it just semicolon, check in, bracket, check in, add a line break, check in. I can do that over and over. Defect density is one that is a bit controversial. So I believe defect density is something we need to look at, but when we talk defect density, we're talking defects per lines of code, which gets back to the bracket check-in, space check-in. I want to see defects per build or defects per release. I don't want to see defect density because it is a very gameable thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause there, let you guys ask questions here.
What do you do with defect density?
So most organizations look at defect density and they say, here's how many defects came out per line of code or per, chunk of release. And they generally say this release was good or bad based on the defect density.
Okay, but if you're asking people to start developing when in an environment where there are unknowns, then you get into the situation where if you report something as a defect, I've worked with teams where they begged me not to report anything as a defect because then how many defects they had showed up on their performance review, it influenced the possibility of promotion, it influenced what their salary was going to be the next year. And if you have a certain amount of uncertainty, if you're doing something that hasn't been done before, something that's reported as a defect might be a change because you got a clarification on a requirement, or something new came up and there's a change in what the business needs. So it could be an agile response, but if you're using defect density, that's a bad thing. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to hear this discussion.
Anytime you've used, my experience is, a metric to beat somebody up, it's a bad metric.
No, I
Or
agree with that.
anytime you use a metric to bonus someone,
True.
because how many times have we seen contracts written where a group is paid to create 1,000 defects, regardless of whether they are or not, because they get paid by the defect.
Fixing them.
No,
Yeah.
So, I mean, you guys realize this is the bad behaviors slide, right? This is not the good behavior slide. This is the stuff we don't want to judge people by. It is terrible. So if you focus on defect density, you will hurt the team every single time.
The only time I've ever seen it used usefully is when you look at a chunk of code for figuring out what you need to clean up and refactor.
Correct. No, you're right, Camille. And thank you for joining.
Hey, John, I want to
So-
add something here before you get off that slide. Just, I mean, I think and I think it was kind of said early, but velocity to me is not a bad metric, but if it's used to compare one team to another, that's when it becomes potentially bad, and used as a report card versus a way for an individual team to improve. Go ahead.
Bob, it can be bad even within a team, particularly if they're new and inexperienced, to just chunk out features as fast as possible and never refactor or clean up their code, and make it long-term harder for them to have good, reliable code.
Well, if velocity is the only metric, then I would agree with that. I mean, but it's part and parcel with several. But I think my point is that whenever you start comparing KPIs, metrics from one team to another, that's when you start going down a slippery slope and saying this team's better than the other team because of these metrics.
Yeah.
And that's
Bob,
Agreed.
that's the reason I think it's number one bad. Like, I have talked with CIOs and had the CIO go, well, how many points does this team have? How many points does that team have? And I'm like, well, this team's using t-shirts. And they're like, okay, well, how many t-shirts into a point? And I'm like, well, that team's using dinosaurs, right? And then they're like, well, how many T-Rexes fit in a t-shirt? And how many points is that? I'm like, so we have to normalize again. Like, I'm trying to figure it out. And then eventually we get into an argument. I've gotten into an argument with the CIO where we're shouting over the table and I'm telling him, I cannot tell you what size t-shirt a dinosaur wears. We get there. We literally get there. Velocity is for the team. They've got dinosaurs, they've got t-shirts, they've got points. That's for them. That is for them to help themselves. If we use that as a measure, then we will get into a dinosaur t-shirt rally, and it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good.
Right.
You can't judge teams against each other on velocity. That's the point. So
You're not delivering t-shirts or dinosaurs.
what size t-shirt does a dinosaur wear?
And even if they're all using, story points or something, it's so easy to game once you start comparing one team to another. They just increase the number of points.
Yeah, and so that's another lesson that I try to teach leadership, and leadership needs to understand that. As soon as you start to use these metrics for good, or like you're trying to bonus on it, or you're trying to say a team's bad, or you're trying to rack stack or stack rank, you can't do that because they can game most metrics. I think there's a couple they can't game. All right, so if our team level mandate is that we increase velocity over time, and we got team A and team B, who's doing better? Open question.
Depend. It depends.
Well, the only team in this chart that's increasing over time looks like Team A.
Correct, but which team is doing better?
That you can't tell.
We don't know. We can tell.
They're exactly the same. It's the same exact curve. They're both learning how to do their jobs. They're both learning how to estimate, or they're both learning how to deliver. It is the exact same curve. So we can't use raw numbers of velocity, because if we do, then we're not doing justice to the team. And if you look at these two, I mean, they're both learning. Seriously, Team B, they overestimated up front. They learned how to handle it. They got there. Team A, they underestimated. They got there.
Right.
They're
So
the
it's
same
predictable.
exact curve. It's exceptionally important that we learn like what velocity is and what that means. It only means that we're stabilizing. A stable velocity is a really good thing. It tells me my team is performing predictably. That's all I'm looking for. And that's all we should be looking for with velocity. It's not about more. I have had executives tell me they want to see an increase in velocity over the quarter. They want 6% increase in velocity quarter over quarter. And I'm like, cool, I can do that. I can increase your velocity by 200% tomorrow. Give me access to Jira, and I will happily increase your velocity. But that's not what teams should be doing. Teams should be stabilizing. Our velocity should stabilize. I don't care if it goes up. When I'm looking at teams in my stack, I don't want them to go up. I want them to stay stable. Now, that being said, we've seen something really strange with COVID. Now, everybody's at home, right? So we're estimating things differently. We've seen velocity spike. We've seen it go up, but now it's stabilizing now that we're all at home. So I don't want to see team A or team B competing. I want to see them flat. And it doesn't matter what their velocity is. I just want them to be flat because I can predict what they're going to do. The most important thing a team can do to me is be stable. It's like when you go to the grocery store, you don't want your car to go 200 miles an hour, then 50, then 200, then 50. You want it to actually stay pretty much where you want it to be. That's what we want teams to do. Teams should be stable, producing work. They should be producing value, which we're working with business on, but I don't want to see them spike in their velocity because that tells me they're unpredictable. I'll pause there because that's usually one I get, a little bit of feedback on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, John. Hey, Luis here. I just want to know, over time, are you not expecting, is that a bad behavior to see that a team is increasing his velocity over time because they are more in control of the technology, they are more in control of they are working better together?
So it's not a bad behavior. I mean, I do expect velocity to change. It can go up or down depending on the team. Like they could see more problems or less. But what I want to see over time, over the long term, is a very flat velocity because the team is formed, they are stormed, they're performing. I want to see them producing pretty much similar velocity every sprint. If they're going like 40 and then 90 and then back to 20 or something like that, that's where I have concerns for the team. I think a team that is performant understands their velocity, they understand the complexity of their work, and they should be flat. They should be flat on the velocity variance. And that's the term probably to write down, velocity variance, because that's how I judge a team on how well they're doing, is whether they are variant or not. Because to me, the entire point of a scrum master, a coach, any of us, is to help the team become performant and help them be stable over time.
John, this is Leon. Maybe my understanding of the previous question was, flat probably in the short term, but if, let's say, after 3 months or so, they implement some new automation platform, something that gives them an edge, and they can bump up their productivity a little bit, not like fluctuating, but constantly from there on. That is, that's not bad.
No, correct. Like, so if there's some new variable in the environment, then absolutely, yeah, their velocity is going to change. And we expect that, and we would hope that it would either go up or down. It depends on how the team counts their velocity. But What we don't want to see is them spiking and dipping and spiking and dipping and spiking and dipping, because that tells me they're either putting things off or they're not doing the right stuff up front. So we want that flatness because it tells us they're working on the right things and they're doing it in a consistent way. So basically, think of it, guys, the team is the engine. The engine produces value. We don't know if the engine's going to produce the right value if the business doesn't tell us, but we can tell if the engine's running well. And if the engine is spiking and dipping, if it's spiking and dipping, we know the engine is not running well. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to have to move on for sake of time, but feel free, if you guys have questions, follow up with me after that. All right, program level. So what is the worst possible previous program level metric we would have done? Think about it. Some of you have done, some of you are project managers, program managers. Think about it. It's easy. Steve, any guess?
One of my favorites is let's see, cost per feature, run rate, EVM. Probably EVM. EVM is my favorite.
Yeah.
Delivery of scope.
Earn.
How many of you have done EVM, like earned value management? Yeah, seriously. It is the most obscured possible thing. It's like, you know what? I feel like I'm halfway through the project, so I'm going to go ahead and take value for that. And then the manager goes, well, like, are you done with anything? No, we're not done with anything. And they're like, well, why are you taking value? Well, because I feel like we're halfway through that. We put in that much effort. And they go, well, how do you know you put in that much effort? I mean, our people did work. We did probably, I feel like probably half the work.
You
So
charge this many hours.
I would like to go ahead and take those hours.
Even in the field that it was designed for, like construction, it tends to be 30% off in one direction or the other. And that's where it was designed to work. Like, building a house where you actually know approximately what's happening when you lay the concrete and you put in the frame.
I used to use the analogy of building a fence. So if I built half your fence, would you pay me half the money, or do you expect me to complete it? Like that's where we were. All right. So what do you guys think at program level, the new way that we're doing things terribly is? Open question. I'm comfortable with silence, even online.
Rolling up velocity.
So two things. Yes, rolling up velocity is the number one. So good job, Jim. Epic cycle time, to me, it's amazing how we misuse cycle time. It's amazing how business misuses it. So our program level mandate is no epics take over 90 days. What do you guys think is going to happen?
They'll write epics in such a way that they will be done in 90 days.
So what we're going to do, probably, yes, we're going to have epic day. It was going to take a bit over 100 days, so I got 100 on the slide.
Well, we can either make it smaller and focus on MVP, but we're probably going to have to just release really crappy code.
So yes, I mean, absolutely right. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, well, there's no 100-day epics anymore. We're going to do them in 90-day increments. So we're going to have Q1 epic, the Q2 epic, the Q3 epic, and the Q4 epic. I've seen this happen. I've seen this at places I can't name because I used to work there, but it is so predictable. When you put a date on epics and you say epics can't be bigger than this, the epics will fit in the time frame you give. As someone said earlier, I mean, teams are gonna meet the mandates they have. It's very interesting to me that we, as an Agile community, want to put timelines on epics, and we don't even agree on what epics are. I mean, some people say epics are a collection of stories, and some say they're a collection of features, and some say features are a collection of stories. But when we try to force people into a constraint and say your epics are going to be this large, well, the epics will fit there. I mean, we're all going to constrain to the system. It's extremely interesting to me that we're not focused on the value, that we're focused on the epic and cycle time.
Yeah, do these provide any business value?
Correct, right? So that's the question, like, what are we doing? What is the actual value we're delivering?
I mean, maybe something would provide business value in 45 days or 120. And for business value or warfighter value or whatever, how much value versus the amount of time and effort we're putting in it, as opposed to what its size is.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. Trying to put value behind this stuff and a reason we're putting limits. So it is important to have faster epic cycle time. It's important to have faster throughput for your organization. It is important to have value tied to those things. But when you literally just go out and say, we're not going to have an epic that takes longer than 100 days or 90 days, you are simply telling your teams to adjust your epics to meet the size instead of actually talking with your teams about why your epics need to be smaller. All right, I'll pause there for just a moment. All right, portfolio. What do you think? What's the legacy terrible and what's the current terrible?
ROI?
I'm sorry, what was that?
ROI?
Oh, ROI. Yeah, so ROI is very interesting. So there's always a return on investment when you're doing something at the portfolio level. Well, there should be. It doesn't mean it's money. It might mean there's reduction of risk. That might mean there's so many different things behind it. But no, that's not where I was thinking. But yeah, that's a very good conversation to have.
What about number of projects closed?
Ooh, stage gate performance.
Yeah, that's terrible.
I think everybody wanted to forget that one.
So,
I was happily forgetting it.
You know, I forget it, you know, and then I have nightmares. So, but you know, stage gate performance, it was, how is your project performing in meeting the stage gates? And the stage gates didn't actually match up to the work we were doing. It was basically saying, are you on track? Are you hitting the critical path? But it didn't tie to actual deployment, didn't tie to customer needs, didn't tie to anything else. So that used to, all right, anybody want to like vent and share some stage gate performance history? Anybody that's been through this before?
Yes, I have one. I had a fairly large SAP project that I was managing, and I was not able to spend a certain amount of capital, even though my staff was kept being capitalized because of the size of it. And I actually had to shut the project down because I could not go over 100% of what was committed up to gate 2 of the project. So therefore, I could not work. Everybody had to take vacation because we could not charge any more to the project from a capital perspective. I had plenty of expense money left, but no capital dollars. And therefore, we had to basically shut down.
Well, I mean, you should have hit your gate, man.
We did hit the gate.
That's why it's such a bad measure. It is literally saying you have to pass through these phases and we're going to fund you based on that. And it made no sense whatsoever. All right, new school, portfolio level. What's the worst thing we can do at the portfolio level? Everybody's getting quiet now.
All right, so in my mind, it's starting too many projects in a single portfolio. So too much whip being pushed down to the.
Too much whip is an excellent answer. I do appreciate that answer.
Not finishing anything or not measuring true value.
So that's good. I mean, we often forget the value. I would like to ask, so we got a lot of professionals on the line here. How are you guys measuring value? In my organization, which I'm speaking on behalf of John Tanner, not Freddie Mac right now, but in my organization, we're doing OKRs. Are you guys doing OKRs? All right then.
Well, at the time I left ExxonMobil, we were doing that. I'm not there anymore, so I assume they're still doing that.
ExxonMobil. I started there. That was my very first job.
Okay.
My company just moved into OKR, so we got this work board and everyone's training, but it's going to take a while to catch up on that.
Hey, John Harmer, you still on?
John, if you are, you're on mute.
So John Harmer's company, Google, actually invented the OKR. I was looking for his opinion, but I think he ditched out. Dude, left me hanging. All right, anyway, modern. So here's the thing that I hear that is a bad measure, unit cost per team. So how much does my user story cost versus your user story? How much does this team's user story cost versus that team's user story? And it's a really hard question to answer because points, I mean, it's like points don't matter, and we're all trying to figure out how to estimate this stuff. So the size of a story or the cost of a story going through a team does not matter because different teams have different work they're doing. You can't judge one team versus another based on the items going through. But I hear this a lot now. Companies want to understand how much is the cost. And it's a really hard conversation. So the best way I've found to handle that is you talk about same store sales. And what that means is this team did this much last year and it cost this much last year. This team is doing this much this year and it costs this much this year. It is the same store. The team is a store. There are certain things flowing through that team, and we can show that either they're stable and predictable and they're producing more things, or we can say that they're producing more value. We can do one of the two or both. And the preferable point is this team is stable, predictable, and producing more value. But we cannot, I don't think we can ever compare team to team. We can compare program to program. We can say what the business is measuring, but we cannot say what the team is doing versus the other team. Because when you get in that, you have to really like dig really deep into business cases and why the team was funded and how many people and what's their expertise and how many points are they, what are they using, t-shirts or dinosaurs? Like you have to get really deep into how the team is performing if you want to compare them one-to-one. I prefer to compare a program. I'm funding a program. The program is producing so much. The teams are doing their work or not. So the program is either performing or not performing, but it's not a team-to-team comparison. I don't think you can do that in Agile without getting into the program level, and then you have to go up to the portfolio. So it's extremely hard to say what a unit costs for the team. How much does a story cost for the team? But we're asked to do that more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So,
John, I would have thought that would have been more at a program level. You know, the team cost to me is not a portfolio level item. You're showing that as a portfolio level item versus a program level item?
So it is because when it comes down to funding teams, that's a portfolio level decision.
Okay.
When it comes down to staffing teams, that's program level. And when it comes down to doing work, that's the team level. But ultimately, if you're talking money, that is a portfolio level decision. That is a decision that we're making to fund the team, the work stream, or the, however you want to talk about it. It is us funding the portfolio that funds that team. So that's why I think about it in that way. Now, I mean, obviously this is my presentation. I think about it the way I think about it, but I'm open to suggestions on how to phrase that better. But if you say our portfolio level mandate is the cost per team, work item is below $10,000, what do you guys think is going to happen?
Smaller work items.
Right. Loaded team cost, team A. Yep. Loaded cost 80 grand over 2 weeks, which is fine. Items delivered 11 and cost per item 72, 73. That seems all right. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's all right. Team B. That's unacceptable. They went over 10 grand. That's not acceptable. So we're going to talk to the lead of Team B. We're going to talk to the executive up there, and we're going to figure out what happened. And you know what? It was that was not the right estimate. Instead, it was 12. It was 12. So we cut it in half, and we cut the cost per item down. So when we start to judge based on money, we get really tricky numbers. We get people cutting things in half. We get people adjusting their budget. That's why, so this, to the point earlier, this is why it's a portfolio level thing. If we're spending money, that's a portfolio thing. Programs execute, portfolios spend. And if we start to judge individual teams based on cost, then we are getting into portfolio areas. We are telling, it's like if you told your investment broker that you want to make a certain return, certain dividend, which right now, obviously we are all looking at the stock market and it's not doing great. But if we told our brokers that we wanted to see certain returns, they would do magic with our money. When we tell our teams that they have to cut their per item cost down, they're just going to split their items. They're going to make their items smaller. I mean, it basically, when we push people, we push them into bad behaviors. That's the point. So I'll pause there because I want to make sure that you guys are following, but do you get it?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yep.
All right, cool. So this is where we get into like driving good behaviors. And I'm sorry, I have to close your faces so I can actually see the screen. If our team level objective is that we become predictable and stable, then it becomes a lot easier to do the good work we're doing. So throughput variance, team stability, backlog mix, defect trending, all those things are great. And I'm going to pause because people, I would like to ask any of you online, can you tell me how you could possibly game throughput? They're going through the chain. How could we game that?
John, could you define for us what you mean by throughput?
Sure. Throughput to me is the total number of stories that went through a sprint, or if you're doing Kanban, it's basically your ongoing throughput, but it's the number of items crossing your backlog.
So, is there a connection at all to value in your definition?
So, I mean, so that's a very good clarification. The underlying assumption is that the team is producing value, but honestly, when I talk about throughput, that is separate. That's the engine running and not the value delivered. But I do agree. Every story should deliver value.
No, we're just gonna slice up every story into 1 point, or slice it horizontally instead of vertically, and we're gonna get a bunch of stories through.
Cool. So to me, a story has to be testable and give value.
Yes, is throughput done exclusively at a team level? All that value, if you're valuable, if you're in a large company where it goes from one team to another team to another team to another team, could look great on yours and just cause huge problems for the team down the line.
It could.
And what would that show you if it was causing problems down the line?
That several possible things. One, your teams are badly constructed. They need skills from other teams combined in them. You've got clearly you've got huge bottlenecks. They're not communicating with each other in all likelihood.
Bottlenecks was definitely what I was looking for.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I think also that story is not independent, because independent of itself should provide value. So when you release it, it should have its own value. So if it's causing problems down the road, then it's not independent.
In large companies, very few things are truly independent, which is one of its problems with largeness.
Yeah, so Camille, you've probably seen this. You've seen this out in the same areas I've seen it. The only way you can really game throughput is to create smaller stories. You break them up and break them up, which is what we actually want. That's why it's not really a gameable metric. Now, if you're not delivering value and it's not testable, that's one thing.
So
But
if you add something like running tested features, or at least at the team level, you're testing everything, and if they game it, it's actually better by making it smaller, by adding tests, things like that. So some gaming can be positive if done the right way.
So that is the exact point, and thank you for making it for me. That's the point. The only way to game throughput is by getting smaller stories that are valuable and testable. Like, that is the only way to game throughput. I mean, you could chop stuff up, but if it's not delivering, then that's not really throughput.
So is it not, at least for Kanban teams, isn't the assumption that you start with the premise that the body of work needs to be equally sized, right? So that we are maintaining a consistent throughput, all other conditions remaining same.
So here's the thing. If you start telling a team what their throughput is, it will become consistent. In my experience, they will find their level of throughput, and it's like water finds its own level, throughput finds its own level. If you put the constraints on them that it has to deliver value and it has to be fully testable, they will find their own level of throughput. Each team is working on different stuff, so you can't compare them one to another, but throughput is something that should be level. And if it's not level, they're not breaking it down enough, in my opinion. And I would also ask the experts on the panel here to actually speak out.
I'm with you there. As long as we've got the constraints that it's got to be testable and it's got to provide value.
Correct. That is the
I'm good.
Yeah.
I would also not look at throughput in isolation. I would look at other metrics too, because if you're just looking at throughput, okay, this team is doing for 10 stories in a 2-week period, that doesn't tell me anything. Okay, how did all the stories take the same amount of time? Did one story take longer than the other? Those are the things I would look at. Yes, 10 is a number. What's the story beneath it?
Yeah, so that's why I have the other measures on the screen right now. Throughput variance is important to me. How much is it going up and down? Team stability. Like, do we have the right people, and are those people fully committed? Are they happy with the team? Backlog mix, are we doing tech enablement stuff, or are we just working on features? And then defect trending. I really want to know what sort of defects are coming out of the team. So this is my core of metrics I want to see in a team. It doesn't mean that's all, because your teams are going to be different, and you guys all have different things you're looking at. But if I've got these 5 things nailed down, and then I've got others on top of that, I feel like I'm doing pretty good with my team.
So John, you mentioned, the team being an engine. That's a metaphor I use as well. I'm thinking about the connection to value here, and you have many more in support of the goal down there, and I'm curious about is the goal here, ultimately to satisfy customers, and so that whole connection to value. Is there a metric here you might consider in terms of the team being able to morph itself in terms of its staffing and its processes to be the team that's needed for what's the most important work that delivers the greatest value?
Yeah, so that's something it's something that I am very passionate about, but I will say it is a work in progress for the long term. So within,
it's basically a continuous improvement metric in pursuit of the goal.
Yeah, always in pursuit of the goal, right? So it also depends on your industry. So I've worked with the White House, I've worked with Ford, I've worked with tons of different companies. I've worked with FINRA. I've worked with different organizations that have different needs, and the teams look different for those organizations. So I can't say we have a great one-size-fits-all answer, but I can say, as long as we're improving towards delivering better and whatever that value is for the organization, then we're moving in the right direction. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm deflecting, but I'm trying to answer the question.
I think the answer that you're giving is correct. I mean, there is no one size fits all here, but I think it is something that, you know, we need to have conversations about that in our organizations to hone in on what is that unique thing that, you know, defines what improvement is, because that's an aspect of this, is how are we getting better as a team? And again, the goal ultimately is to deliver great customer value. So.
That is correct. I mean, that's the top thing, right? Whoever your customer is or whatever your customer is, that is the most important thing.
Yeah, and probably a good indication of whether the metrics you're choosing are the right metrics or not is how it supports that ultimate goal.
I agree. And it has to be, you know, it's two sides of it, right? Build the right thing and build the thing right. So that's what we're working on.
Absolutely. Yeah, agree completely.
All right, gonna move
I
forward.
like what you said about build the right thing, because as long as we're focused on that, then if the teams are working on the right thing, as soon as they become stable, you hit a nice level of performance and customer value. So
I feel like we just moved through a couple of slides. So we talked about throughput.
I had a question on throughput. I've seen that sometimes when teams try to deliver more and more stories, they sometimes incur a lot of technical debt because they can say that, hey, the technical debt is not going to be addressed for the next 1 year. We'll worry about it next year. So how do you prevent that?
I'm sorry. I think I missed the question. What was that?
I've seen that sometimes focus on the throughput is achieved by incurring a lot of technical debt, and the technical debt is addressed a year down the line or so.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm cutting somebody off, but what we generally do, we have a backlog mix. So we have a look at what is technical debt, what is features, what is defect rate. We've got all that in our backlog mix. So we literally track the type of work being done. And if a team is not at least paying attention to their technical debt, we will go have a conversation. It doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong. It just means we have to have a coach to go talk with them and figure out exactly what they're doing. But I'm sorry, I think that was Camille or somebody I was cutting off.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we talked about for the throughput that needed to deal with testability and business value.
Yeah.
But on Raj's, I think I'm pronouncing that right, tell me if I'm wrong, concept on technical debt here, the thing that's not addressing is the level of code complexity in general and the number of code smells, which you could hide for a long period of time if you're, say, starting on something greenfield that's not a huge mess to start with, but it could become a huge mess fairly quickly. That would be very hard to change. So if your technical debt backlog that you're including deals with that, then you've got that covered, but that's going to depend on the maturity of the team. A lot of the teams haven't a clue.
We used a chart, I know when we were getting together some of the teams, and actually more management than anything, was, you know, the triumvirate of building the right things, meaning the things that drive value, building things right, meaning with quality, and with speed. And it's really the intersection of those three is where you've got to hit, because any one of those three in isolation is not going to lead you to the right result. Either you're not going to build it fast enough, or you're not going to build it with enough quality, or you're not going to build the right thing. So you got to hit that center point of those three.
You also have a consideration with legacy software, that the pieces of the software that are really hideously messy but never get touched are probably not worth the effort of improving a whole lot, as long as they're not buggy. Then, you know, they're not creating errors. But the parts that the team didn't create but are changed a great deal, then are modified, then even though they didn't create them, that's worth improving and simplifying.
Yeah.
So I have a question. When you're quantifying how much technical debt, how much, bugs, like what the percentages are in each bucket, and you're trying to voice that, are you quantifying that by the volume of stories? Are you quantifying that by estimations? Like, how are you quantifying that data?
Yeah.
Because
So,
sometimes teams have technical debt and they don't even know how much of it they have. They know they have some, but it's hard to get into those details and go back to product and say,
yeah.
here's how much tech debt we have. So how are we quantifying that?
So that is exceptionally hard to answer, and it depends on business to business. What we've set as our threshold is 20% needs to be spent on technical stories and 80% on features. But honestly, that's kind of us doing a wag, and we're putting it out there. I know different organizations need different things. It depends on your product, how old it is. Is it legacy? Is it new? Like that's hard. So I would ask the rest of the panel here, do you guys have a set score for how much tech debt?
No, it's like so many engineering questions. It depends.
Yeah, hang on. That's a consulting answer. The consulting answer is
yes. I know.
That's a hard answer to give product, and they're asking, all right, well, you have tech debt, about approximately how much tech debt, how much time do you need to tackle it, right?
Well, so no longer being a consultant, actually working, leading a Agile COE, I said 20%. So that's what I did, but it's so hard because each organization has different needs.
John, that's 20% of what? 20% of the
20% of your backlog over time needs to be spent either tech debt or removing defects or something. It can't be 20% of your backlog is not on value.
So John, does this come down to, in part, kind of a definition of done, and what level of robustness do you have in having a zero defects accepted approach? Is ultimately what we're trying to do is to reduce the number of fires that we're fighting that are disrupting our ability to move forward. In other words, breaks in production that distract our current team. And I think that's one of the tactics I use is the team that builds it is the team that fixes it, so that any problem that they create, any sins that they commit in their youth, they boomerang back on them. So how often are you interfered with as a team by stuff that you sowed the seeds of your own disruption?
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of you build it, you own it. That is the entire idea, that the team that builds it owns it, and they have to take care of their own problems. I also understand there's refactoring that's going to come in because code gets stale. It's like any other sort of thing. It gets stale over time, so we have to work on it. That's where if we instill the YB, you build, you own, and the fact that you have to have a certain percentage of your backlog every single sprint focused on refactoring, that's the question is how much percent, and that really depends on the team and the company. I don't want to put a number out because it really depends. Is that fair?
What's a healthy number to achieve, either sprint by sprint or even with Kanban at the end of a cycle? Like, what's a healthy percentage of work that you should be tackling for tech debt or escalations?
That's going to depend on your product.
Okay.
If you're building something like, you're building a manned mission to Mars, you're building something that monitors, patient health, something that's life critical, that's going to be very, very different than if you're building a one-off game for your iPhone.
So Camille, how many missions to Mars have you consulted?
Oh, I haven't, but however, I have worked in DoD a fair bit, and in the IC, and people's lives, matter. And the next level down of criticality is the field that you're currently working in, which is the financial one, where we've got, financial criticality.
Dude, she's totally got my back. This is awesome. All right, so I'm going to go through this slide. We've only got a couple left, and then we'll go to just open Q&A. Pirate metrics. Do you guys, I mean, it's right there on the screen, but can you tell me why it's called pirate metrics? Come on, this is hilarious.
Arr.
That's it. It's the stupidest joke in Agile. That's it. It is
It's the sound.
A-R-R-R.
Arr. Yeah.
I should have worn my pirate outfit today.
I'm telling you. But what we're looking for is roadmap, visibility, feature lead time. So how far to market are we? Net promoter score, which most of you are familiar with, and then the R.
Arr.
So stupid. It is the stupidest joke in Agile. All right. So if we think about it in terms as an OKR, we reliably produce value for the organization. We get 3 to 6 months of market visibility, roadmap visibility, and feature lead time. We increase customer centricity and satisfaction, net promoter score, and pirate metrics. I mean, seriously, this is what we're trying to do. And OKRs are important for us. So this talk's not about OKRs, but I'm leaning very hard into OKRs because they allow us to shape an organization based on objectives and key results. So if our portfolio level objective is that we, hang on, I gotta close you guys, increase ROI through better investment. Portfolio mix, this is something that most organizations don't think about. And it's hard for organizations to think about. They're used to thinking about projects and teams. We're not funding a team. We're not funding a project. We're not funding a group of teams. We are funding a portfolio. We are investing in something. And if we can make sure that we're investing in the right mix instead of investing in a team that may or may not be working and we're worried about the team, are they overperformers or underperformers? If we can move away from that thought and think about it as portfolio, then we'll do a lot better. And I'll take questions on that in a second. So value stream, WIP, we got all that. What do you guys think are the 3 most common business needs? And this is historical.
Predictability.
And like I said, I'm comfortable with silence. So anybody else?
What do you mean by business needs exactly? That's a very large concept.
Customer.
I would say predictability.
Yeah, predictability is a big one.
So the 3 things I've heard from CEOs and from the C-suite, it's always been in this order: time to market, increased ROI, and reduced cost. It used to be that ROI was number 1. It used to be cost was number 2, and then it used to be time to market was number 3.
But doesn't time to market tie into like predictability?
It does.
To gain an understanding. Okay.
Yeah. So honestly, it all ties together. But what I'm hearing from C-suite people is time to market is number 1 now. ROI could be that we're getting more revenue. It could be we're actually doing things better. Like ROI is a very hard thing to nail down. And then reduced cost is number 3.
So John, how do these connect to actual behaviors?
So when we change our focus from ROI to time to market, when we start thinking about lead time and cycle time instead of product we're releasing, when we start thinking about stability of our ability to produce value, it becomes more transparent to, not more transparent, but it becomes more of a focus for the teams that we need to release faster and more stable. And the other 2, increased ROI and reduced cost, are ancillary to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it done right, these drive good behaviors at a team level. I'm thinking more at the executive level. what I observe often is we say things like time to market and increased ROI, which, you know, return on investment could be a proxy for making customers happy, because otherwise, you know, you're not going to generate revenue or return on investment ultimately. But what we often see is there's a focus on reducing cost. And sometimes that seems to be the optimization goal, is reducing cost, and the others are subservient.
I think part of that is because management has a tendency to count the beans that are easy to count.
I agree.
They're not necessarily the important things.
Yeah.
And cost is easy to count.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way I would answer this, at first, and I love those three you've got there, John, but if you deliver incrementally, you're going to be able to increase or reduce your time to market for at least part of what you're delivering. And hopefully it's the highest value items. So you're going to start getting value for the increment that you've delivered. And then you might find over time that you don't need the other features or stories because you've delivered enough value. And then you can reduce the cost by not delivering those features that no longer are perceived to be valuable. So I think you can hit all three with those if you do focus on incremental delivery.
The fascinating thing is to see the switch from time to market, because the computer age in the last 20 years, we've seen that we cannot achieve return on investment if somebody else beats us to market.
Right.
And it's so easy for other people to beat us to the market now that we have to be there first. So time to market, because the longer it takes you to get something, it just drops in value if everybody else is jumping in. But yes, we want to reduce the cost of what we're currently doing repeatably over and over again. But we also need to focus on making sure that we're doing the right thing and getting that done so we can reap value from it. So I think these make a lot of sense, John.
But I have one thing that as I was on mute and I was taking the quiz, time to market, I was on track with that. But I'm like, wait a minute, we got reduced cost in there before quality. So that I did take a pause on. Right? Because as a common business need, I would, yes, I want time to market, but I got a whole lot of headaches if I don't have quality.
And that's correct. And that's where you need to get your business leaders' heads at. But right now, this is where the business leaders' heads are.
Gotcha.
This is the most common things that I hear from CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you think, it's what
right.
they. And you're right. Quality fell off the table.
Right. Well, I get it, and I get why. I'm just letting you guys know. That's sort of where I took the pause, right? I was like, wait a minute.
It also depends on who you're delivering your product to and in what environment. If I can, do a lean startup sort of thing and get my time to market really short with people that are tolerable of,
I understand
bugginess, it's entirely different than if I have to get something to market quick and the first time they see the product, they hate it and they'll never come back. Very different environments.
Right. I know it's not a one size fits all. It's just something that I took a pause on and I went, oh, this is where we are. Okay.
It's time to market. We want to get the next round of funding. We want to get our investment. We want to get something out there. We want to start learning, but we can't increase our ROI or cut costs if we've got poor quality. So we can get to market and then we've got to fix quality, or we can fix quality and still get to market. But
God, Steve, there you go again. You just want it all, don't you?
I do, but I'll take quality second if I need to get to market. So
I think this is a key lean concept too, in the fact that if you catch bugs early, they're less expensive to fix and therefore improve quality and therefore reduce costs overall, right? As well. I think that you can make a case that improved quality actually costs less than not.
And what it's going to cost you.
Right? Absolutely.
It's the old Microsoft approach where they put out beta releases and people were overjoyed to test for Microsoft for free.
Yep.
I mean, if your customers are willing to be your testers and they're willing to say, hey, this is off by 10%, and you can react quick enough to get that right, I mean, they feel like they have a special in with you. I mean, you mentioned Google. You find a feature missing on Google, you get the hey, that's a great idea. We're going to assign a team to that, and just keep an eye out on the entire internet. Maybe you'll find it someday.
By the way, our company is recently exploring this dual track agile. So if any of you are familiar with that, I will put my email address in there, and hopefully you can kind of coach us, because this is one way that they're trying to find to go around accumulating a bunch of tech debt and just kind of getting something in front of the customer and seeing if they can build on it or if they want to scrap it. So I'm very curious if anyone knows how that whole dual tracking works. I'd love to speak with you.
Please do put that link or contact information. Interesting.
Thank you. I will.
Also, I'd like to say, Randy, I mean, I was one of those guys that was an early Microsoft like tester for random stuff, and it was terrible, and I hate it. So
don't ask me about Teams. Just don't ask me.
I've become a big fan of Teams, but we'll talk later.
Really?
So we're moving into the last slide. This is the last slide, guys. So you're almost done. You've almost made it through it. What I want to talk about is creating leadership buy-in, because one of the things, and I know multiple of you on this conversation have had these talks, but your executives have to be bought in for whatever, like, don't use metrics for evil. Your executives have to be bought in. So where I start with is creating awareness. So we show the first couple of slides how using velocity can be bad, how using what we normally call agile measures can be used for bad reasons. Then we are empathetic and we ask what problems the executives are solving for. So whoever owns the actual initiative, we have to ask them, what do you want to know? Because they're not out there making up a reason to look at these numbers. They're trying to figure it out. They're either reporting up to a board, a CEO, they're reporting somewhere, or they're genuinely curious. They're trying to figure out what we're doing, and we have to be empathetic. But we also have to have the answers, which hopefully we've talked about that a little bit today. You have to bring solutions. You cannot just show up and say everything's messed up. You have to say everything's messed up and here's how we're going to solve it. The most important thing you can do for leadership or for people that are in your org controlling metrics is you show up and you say, here's why you're doing it wrong and here's how we're going to help you. Because if you don't do that, then they're left in the same quandary as number two, that you have to give them an answer. And if you don't give them an answer, they will find an answer, and it's probably not going to be you if you didn't give it to them. So you really have to work hard at that. Oh, be realistic. Yeah, so we've talked about this a lot on the call. So whatever we're going to solve for, we're going to solve for it in the right way, whether that's your velocity is off or it doesn't matter, your throughput variance. We're going to measure the right things, but we're also going to fix the things. The point is we're going to go coach and we're going to solve the problem. If you can bring that back to your leadership and you say, here's the things we think are wrong and here's how we're going to solve them, you will get much, much further than just saying, here's the thing I feels like bad. That doesn't help anybody. You have to solve the problem. You have to at least have a solution, even if it's not the solution accepted. And then do the work, man. Measure it, change it, measure again. That's the whole reason we collect data. We measure, we change, we measure again. That's what we do over and over and over. And it does seem tedious, but that's how we create change. We create change by measuring change. We create change by knowing that we're getting a little bit better, and then we measure again. And if we get a little bit worse, that's okay. We measure again, and we come back again, and we have a new plan. We have a new coaching plan. We have a new metrics plan. We have a new plan. If we are the people that bring problems instead of solutions, then we're not the right people. If that's where you find yourself, then reach out for help. I will help you. I will help you build a plan. I will personally guarantee that I will help you build a plan. You all have my email address. It's at the bottom of the slide deck. I am happy to help you. But what we can't do is tell people that we don't know, or that we don't know how to measure our teams, or we don't know how to measure these things, because we do. We actually do. All right, so I'm going to pause, and Steve, I'm going to leave it up to you. So I could tell a story about how I once deleted WebRoot at the White House. I could tell a story about how once I was on an airplane that caught fire. I could tell a story about how once I was attacked by a pack of dogs. So
I think
I'm going to leave that to you.
I think I want to hear your White House fiasco, because that was all you do, unless you're the one that caught the plane on fire.
Yeah, so I actually was not, but it's a good story. So we'll someday, guys, we'll all catch up and talk about it. But Steve requested White House. So I used to work at the White House Communications Agency, and I was teaching a guy. I was training him on how to deploy code to the White House. Like, we're not talking about the external facing, we're talking internal. So like basically Obama, the way he planned his day, that's the code that we were in charge of. So I was teaching this guy, and I was saying, don't ever click here, because if you click here, it's going to deploy and has permissions to deploy, but not permissions to remove. And then I clicked it. And I was literally training the guy, and the guy gets up, he stands up, he goes, I'm going to go back to my desk now. I was like, probably a good idea. So my boss is right behind me, and it's a plastic cube, but he's like right behind me. I'm like, hey, Dan, I just deleted WebRoot. He goes like, what'd you delete? I was like, all of it. I deleted everything.
Oh, sweet.
He goes, hang on. Then he gets his key card out, goes into the other room, the room that we don't go into. And he comes back a few minutes later, and he goes, they're going to get it back. It's going to be hard. Well, so fast forward 2 weeks, we did get it all back. We lost, the National Archive probably lost a week's worth of Obama pictures, but I think we're okay. 2 weeks later, I am standing in front of a colonel, and the colonel says, how'd that happen? I was like, well, here's how it happened, sir. We have poor controls in place. We did not have the right software in place, and we did not have the right controls in place. He goes, how are you going to fix it? I was like, well, sir, I'm going to put in CI/CD. And I explained what CI/CD was. And the colonel goes, okay. He's like, so will this be done in the next 2 weeks? I was like, absolutely, sir. It will be done in the next two weeks. And I kid you not, the White House went from having no CI/CD to having CI/CD in about 2 weeks, because I deleted WebRoot from the White House. And I have no idea how I'm still like alive and not in jail, but it was not a great couple of weeks.
Love that story though, but you owned up to it. So, and you fixed
So here's the thing. So if ever you delete WebRoot from something very important, talk to your boss, and then go in front of a colonel and tell the colonel that you're going to fix it. And apparently that works. It works.
No, you still have to deliver, but yeah.
Well, I don't know what they're doing now. I don't know.
Now they're blaming somebody else. So,
all right. So Steve, we have questions on the line. This was the end of the presentation, and actually extra. So do you want to read out the questions, or do I do that? Like, what are we doing?
Let's see. We have we have questions in the chat, and we have questions online. Of course, we were just asking questions about, when was the last time people wore socks? So let's see.
I would like to know that.
Define good. And how to find good leading versus trailing relevant KPIs that will satisfy upper management demands for visibility for nonprofit government scenarios.
So it's really hard. Like the leading is what your velocity variance, the throughput variance have been. Your trailing are generally value. So OKRs, how you hit those. It's exceptionally hard, and it depends on organization, because you might be in a highly financial sector to where they're looking at different measures than the NGOs of the world. So I would say leading, definitely look at your variance And then trailing is always like measuring what you've delivered and the value you've gotten. Camille, all right, I'm gonna lean on Camille. I want her to chime in here.
Say that again. Sorry, I let myself get distracted for a moment.
Never mind. You're done. You're done.
She was thinking about socks. So
socks.
Okay.
Wore them all day. Sorry.
All right. So it is challenging if you can't put dollars on it, but Net Promoter Score is still always a very good, I think, trailing indicator, as well as quality coming back if bugs are being found. So those are a couple things. But John, will the slides be provided?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. John's pretty good. Dual track. Let's see. All right. Dual track. We'll ask about that. Product backlog refinement, including your feedback loops. Oh, that was from Jim, who I think had to drop off. Actually, we don't have many questions in here. I was kind of reading through it.
I like it that way. I don't have to answer things.
Yeah. So
Menti?
Did someone want to know what running tested features was and why that's a metric that gaming actually improves? If not, doesn't matter. If you're interested, I've got a slide share on it.
Awesome. So I think Camille is going to do a meetup with us at the end of May, maybe.
Okay.
And we're going to do it virtually because this virtual thing works out pretty well. How do you guys think?
If you guys don't know Camille is amazing. She is awesome in the space of co-coding. Like she is a very much an expert in the space of agile teams. So I would love to see her do a session.
Thank you.
And Camille's technical knowledge and coding knowledge is probably better than all of us. So, or at least that's the thought. So,
the folks here.
Okay, well,
that may be too kind.
All right.
I did have a question I wanted to ask, and sorry, there's like a lag on my network, but I wanted to find out. So something that we obviously changed product. I mean, our entire exec suite has recently changed, and something that the new people coming in really want to see is metrics around predictability. In the past, we've done quarterly planning where we basically, estimate something at a high level and we look at how close we actually came to actuals to those estimations. So communicating predictability, what is a good way to do that if you're no longer doing quarterly planning and you're doing quick iterations? Is that through velocity? Is that through how would you go about communicating those numbers out?
So I would be happy to hop on a call and show you the dashboard we use at Freddie,
Okay.
But it is very much about velocity variance. It's about variance versus numbers. And
oh, interesting.
Yeah, variance, backlog mix. We've got an entire dashboard that I can't share here for reasons, but I would love to get on a call with you. So please connect with me and I can show you.
Okay. I would love to see that. I really appreciate that.
So if your teams are stable and they're producing regular throughput, and you're hoping that the stories are being created correctly and they're doing the right thing,
right?
You've got your predictability is doing pretty good.
Yeah, and I think that's been our biggest struggle. Is it's easier to become predictable, especially with Kanban teams, if you're all sizing the stories and delivering those roughly within the same time frame. But that's always a different challenge, right? Yes, I'd be happy to work back with you, John. I really appreciate that.
All right, please.
So one of the things that we do I was saying that one of the things that we do in my organization for predictability is to break down the work into iterations and then have a release plan so that at least we have it for around 3 or 4 sprints. So by the time you get get through it, you have a good idea of exactly where you are, what you predicted. It also helps people think through what they are trying to do.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's with Scrum, right? we have a combination within our organization of Scrum and Kanban. So I'd love to see how you communicate predictability between both of those teams that are working toward a larger initiative.
Well, both teams for either Scrum or Kanban, you need to have, several weeks worth of data before you're going to have predictability. Like say, 4 1-week iterations or whatever. Because if you're just starting off, nothing's very predictable. You haven't done it before. If you've got a history, you're in a pretty good shape. Also, it matters enormously on the team stability. One of the problems I see in large businesses is that they hire an enormous percentage of contractors. The contractors get really good at something, and then the contractors want more money. The company says no, and then all of a sudden it's a new bunch of contractors that you've got to totally retrain and gear up again. So if your team itself is stable with the people in it reasonably, then you're good to go. If it keeps changing, that's going to make everything very hard to predict. So something to be aware. And if John or anyone else has a good way of communicating to upper management that once people have skills, don't just let them go because they're a little bit more expensive. They're also more valuable. People are not interchangeable cogs, and that's particularly true of developers.
Yes.
And hasn't some of our biggest talks about value today? We're trying to get more value from everything that we measure, not just the people, but everything across the board. So how do you guys think John did today?
Oh, terrible. Dude was awful. I don't like him as a presenter at all.
This was really helpful.
Yeah,
I have to disagree, John.
Really helpful, yes.
All right, so John was asking about socks, and he asked me to put that. How many of you think John is wearing pants right now?
Oh. It's a trick question.
That CNN reporter.
Yeah, that's TMI. I have to agree.
I'm not standing up, Steve. I'm not going to do it.
Okay, I'm gonna end this recording then.